Welcome, everybody. This is Books Cafe, brought to you by free-ebooks.net. I'm your host, Scott Patton, and welcome. I'm very, very excited because today I have a really good friend who's an amazing author joining us. And the Globe and Mail in Canada says he writes just about the tidiest romantic comedic novels you can find on earth, let alone in Canada. And I met this gentleman 6 or 7 years ago. Gordon So, a good friend of both of ours, introduced us, and he had an amazing story. And whether you may or may not know that I do a lot of podcasting since 2005. I've done podcasting, and he was able to use podcasts to turn his first book into a Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor winner, and he's done that twice. And maybe it wasn't that book, but regardless, he can correct me if I'm wrong. And that book was The Best Laid Plans, and it came out in 2008. Yes, it did. It won the 2008 Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. And in 2011 was the winner of the CBC Canada Reads as the essential Canadian novel of the decade. And as soon as I had finished finding out about our guest, I went out and I bought every book that was published at that time and gave one to my mom, one to my sister, one to my brother-in-law, and one to my nephew. I think there was 4 at the time, for their birthday presents. And of course, we celebrate, all their birthdays are kind of within a week of each other. So I gave them all at the same time and then told them, as soon as you're done, whoops, maybe I shouldn't have told them this, switch books. So they all got to read all the books and became fans. And it was really funny. So since then, he's done a number of books, and we're going to be talking about his latest book, Albatross, in a little bit more detail as he comes on. So with that, I want to welcome to the show Terry Fellis. How you doing, Terry?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks so much for having me. Nice to be online with you in these strange times.
Yes. And before we get into the books and everything else, and I'd like to know a little bit about your process of creating. I had commented before how much I liked your backdrop, which is not a fake backdrop. It's actually, you're in your library, and those are real physical books, unlike what you see down here or up here, which we use. And it occurred to me that I'm not going to say this is one of the secrets to success, but one of the things that you've done is you have created an environment that really supports you in your writing, because you're surrounded by all these books. It looks inspirational to me. I can just imagine myself sitting where you are, and I'd be like writing like crazy, right? and I think that's one thing that new authors don't spend enough time on. They've like, I've got to get my book out, and they'll go to Starbucks where there's all this stuff going on, and they'll drink their coffee, and they'll be trying to write their book, and I think most of them get really frustrated because they're not creating an environment that supports their success, whatever that is. In our case, we're talking about authors.
Right. Now, I think you're right. My wife and I worked hard to create this space when we renovated our house about 12 years ago, and it's up on the 3rd floor. And if I look to my left here, there are doors out onto a balcony. It's the 3rd floor of our home, so it overlooks our backyard, and I'm surrounded by books, and not just any books. These are the books I've collected over the years and are meaningful to me.
So you didn't go to a garage sale and buy 300 books for $2?
No, that might be tempting, but I barely have room for the books that we own. But it is a nice space. It is inspirational. I can look across the room and see, John Irving, my John Irving novels are there. He's been a great inspiration. I can look up on the wall here, and I've got a photograph of Robertson Davies signing a book in Nova Scotia, and he's one of my heroes. He kind of presides over this desk here where I write, and then over here I have all of my books up on a shelf between 2 typewriter bookends that when I get frustrated in whatever I'm writing at the time, I just have to turn and look over there, and I say, okay, I've done this before, I can do it again. just to get back to work and get focused. So yeah, I don't think every writer needs to have a great space to write, but I think I'm one of those who does, and I really like it. And Virginia Woolf wrote a whole book called A Room of One's Own, and I think about that line often. Writers need a room of one's own.
Right. And so, do you do all of your writing in that room, or do you kind of take off sometimes and go somewhere else?
Yeah, it would be nice to do it all here, but my life and my schedule is such that I can't all spend hours on end in this wonderful room. So I occasionally write when I'm on the road, whether I'm at writers' festivals or just touring around with the book, because sometimes you're on deadline and you have to get it done. Other times I write at, we have a cottage. I can go up to the cottage and write. And once I remember I actually took a week and I sequestered myself in a rather dingy hotel room. I didn't want a nice hotel room. I wanted a dingy hotel room. This one happened to be in Collingwood, and I spent a week there getting over an important hump in the process of writing I think it was my 5th novel or 6th novel at the time. So once in a while, it's nice to get away where you're just by yourself. And I didn't leave the room for a week. I didn't even go out into the hallway. So I got an awful lot done. There's much to do except write in one of those, it wasn't a bad hotel room. It was just, there was nothing to commend it beyond a comfortable bed and a bit of a kitchenette. Right. So I've tried that once in a while, and that's been helpful. But in general, I would say probably 75% of the writing I do happens in this very space, and for that I am grateful.
And you've done enough books and you've written enough there that your body and your mind kind of, when you go into the room, they sort of click into the writing mode because that's how you've trained yourself, right?
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of the great equalizer, because I was writing here when my first novel, which I ended up self-publishing it. So before I published, I was writing in this room. So it just reminds me of those times as well. So I come in here and all bets are off. I sit down and I try to get to work.
Cool. You had mentioned you had the 2 typewriter bookends with your books in between, and you look at them when you get frustrated. And of course, as an award-winning, best-selling author, everyone knows you've never, ever been frustrated in your life when it comes to books. So that is, obviously I'm being facetious, but everybody comes to these writer blocks, these times of frustrations that when maybe they don't know what the character is supposed to do, or they don't know what the next step is, and those sort of things. And can you talk a little bit about how you get through those types of challenges as a writer?
Sure, and it probably works best if I tell that in the context of my writing process, such as it is. I think one of our jobs as writers is to figure out how we write best, because writing, the cliched writer is the one who is miserable and frustrated and spends all of his or her time wrestling words and spending a whole day and coming up with a paragraph that they might salvage for their book. And yeah, writing can be like that, but I don't think it's always like that, or that it has to be like that. When I hear writers who have that experience, who are overburdened with frustration and misery, but are compelled to write, it makes me wonder sometimes whether they have figured out how they're supposed to write, how they write best. And I feel very fortunate, because I think I stumbled into the way that I write best on my very first novel. Maybe because I didn't know what I was doing, and I just thought, okay, I should approach this the way my engineer's brain tells me to. And I have a degree in engineering, not the traditional precursor to a career as a writer. But engineers don't build bridges without blueprints, and I decided that I wasn't going to write a novel without a blueprint. So I am very much a planner, in that spectrum that writers have heard about, with the planners on one side and the what we call pantsers on the other extreme. the pantsers being those who write by the seat of their pants, which is a perfectly legitimate and very successful for many writers way to write. But I'm very much a planner. Uncertainty is kind of the enemy of my writing. If I don't know what the story is and where it's going, I'm not going to start writing sentences. So I spend the first 14 months or so of my writing process planning out the novel, figuring out the characters, the storyline, their backstories, the plot points, who does what to whom and when. And I map that out on a chapter map, and then I blow that chapter map out into a bullet point chapter by chapter version of the novel, which usually runs about, well, it's run anywhere from 60 to 90 pages. And that's just, it's basically the whole novel in bullet point form, what happens in each chapter. And then I pore over that outline. I run through it over and over, and each time I tweak a few things. And when I finally go through it, it's like 3 times in a row and don't tweak anything, it feels like it's ready for me finally to write. So 14 months in to this 18-month process, I then start to write the manuscript. And I quite literally put the outline on one side of my screen, that 90-page outline, and I put my manuscript on the other side of my screen, and I write. And it allows me to commit all of my questionable cerebral powers to the act of crafting sentences. No part of brain is worried about what my characters are going to do next, because I know what they're going to do next. I know what they're doing through every moment in the book, because I've been living with it for 14 months in bullet points and in my head. So then I just write. It usually takes me about 4 months of weekends, or less if I can write on more than just the weekends. And I've got a 100,000-word manuscript that is pretty close to the final version. Sure, there's a couple of rounds of edits to go with my editor, but also a few with me before I give it to the editor. So it's certainly not over when I finish that draft, but I think the process works for me because I don't end up doing 5 drafts and not too much heavy editing. So I think that's the benefit of a detailed outline. Your first draft is pretty close to your published draft. So when I get stuck, I don't often get stuck in writing the manuscript, because so much has gotten me to the point where I'm writing the manuscript. I'm just in a sprint then, writing sentences that I love, trying to bring these bullet points to life with prose that people might enjoy. But early on in the process, I will often, as I'm planning it out, I'll get stuck on how to get from plot point B to plot point C. And sometimes I'm utterly stymied and I can't get there. And I've learned through firsthand experience that I cannot come up to the library and say, okay, today I'm going to figure out plot point A to B or B to C problem. And I just sit there and think deep thoughts. Nothing will ever happen when I do that. So I just continue to carry the issue around in my head when I'm walking, when I'm folding laundry, when I'm cutting the grass, when I'm doing the grocery shopping, when I'm cooking. And eventually something just slips into place and a solution will present itself if I don't force it. Right. So it requires some patience and some confidence in the process that it will eventually be solved if I don't push it too much. That's probably more than you wanted to know, Scott. But
that's a great answer, and it's really helpful. And my question is if you're stuck on going from plot point B to C, will you write about plot point E to F as you're waiting for that to come up, or do you have to kind of wait until that's done before you can move on to the next part?
That's a good question. Normally, the way the novel, the idea comes to me or develops for me as a how to put it. I mean, I know the general arc of the story. I know the big thing that happens in the middle. I know the big thing that happens at the end. And it's usually when I'm going back, figuring out, okay, but how do I get there? So sometimes I'm doing what John Irving does, and I'm working backwards from a plot point. But I can tell you that I tend to be a very chronological writer. I'm not one of those writers when I get to the manuscript where I'll say, I'm kind of bored with this chapter. I'm going to write chapter 12 now instead of chapter 6 where I am. That's not, I'm much too regimented and engineered to do that. I just go chapter 1 and then I write chapter 2 and then I write chapter 3.
It's like writing, it's like building the roof before you put the walls up, before you put the foundation on, right? It's
exactly.
We had a great comment from Sana. So relatable. The same happens to me with my writing. It just falls into place when I take a break. Yeah, let the subconscious mind do its work. Thanks, Sana.
Right.
And that reminds me, if anyone's, we're live right now. And if you know we're live and you have a question for Terry, please put it in the comments and I'll make sure that I ask him. And your whole explanation reminded me of the title of your first book, Best Laid Plan. So I think, wow, you laid out the best plan and now you're implementing the plan, and you have that engineer mind. I don't, but I have a friend that does, and he's just thinks exactly the same way you do. And it doesn't drive me crazy, but we sure laugh a lot because we come at things from such different ways, right?
Well, that's why writing is such an extraordinary occupation or preoccupation or obsession, as it might be. When I often will run workshops, conferences and festivals about, how I outline my novels. And the first thing I talk about is I put a slide up that says, I'm not telling you that you should outline your novels. Right. Who am I to do that? We all write differently, and we can all find our place on that spectrum from pantser to planner. But the important thing is to try and figure out where you are there and how you write in the way that makes it easiest for you to have a great result and have a document, a manuscript at the end that is going to be compelling right. and worthy. And if we don't examine our frustration and to figure out the roots of it and what we can do to maybe I should try a different approach if this one isn't working. If we stick to this belief that, no, I have to write every day, so I have to just start writing and it will come, and not try something else when that doesn't work, I think we're doing ourselves as writers a disservice.
Yes.
So I think we need to spend some time to sort out what feels best for us as writers. I went to see Richard Wright speak once, the late, great Richard Wright, who wrote Clara Callan, which I think was the first Giller Prize winner, or it certainly was a Giller Prize winner. And I remember, me as the engineering writer who plans everything to within an inch of its life before I even write a sentence. He said from the front of the room to this packed festival hall, I couldn't get my ass in the chair each morning if I knew where the story was going. And for him, what sustains him and nourishes his life as a writer is that excitement of sitting in front of a blank page and working through the story and writing it as it comes. That's what works best for him. I could never do that. But I accept fully that lots of writers prefer that way and write best that way. And I'm not going to tell them not to do that. It's really only if you're really frustrated and can't get what you want that you might try outlining your novel if you've never done outlining before.
Well, and you can try different. First of all, we should know what our personalities are, and writing is at its very basic is get a pen, get a paper, and just put some words on and then you can sort of see like, well, that doesn't really, like the fellow you were just talking about. I get my jolt because I got a blank page, and I want to discover the story
right
as I'm writing the story. Where we're planning this building. It's going to be a skyrise, or it's going to be a mansion, or it's going to be a little hut, and we're going to put it all together. And then I'm going to on paper, and then I'm going to actually build it. Although both things happen on paper in this case, right?
Right.
So,
right.
and like you said, and I love that you've got this spectrum, and you're going to fall right in, because when I write, I make notes, like my point forms.
Sure.
I don't go quite to the detail. Well, of course, my writing is not 10,000 words either, So I make my points, and it's the same when I talk. Usually when I talk, I've got like 3 or 4 points that I want to make and hit on, and I don't trust my memory to remember them all. So that's why I write them down. And then it's like, okay, did I get all my points? Yeah, I did. Or no, I didn't. Oh, I forgot this point. And then I talk about it. And I'm very open about I have a plan. I have an agenda. I work that way, but it's I'm not at your end of the spectrum, and I'm not at the far end of the pantsy set. I'm kind of like in the middle, and it sort of shifts depending on, if it's 7 paragraphs, I probably don't put out a bunch of notes on it.
Well, I think actually that writers, if they look to their own lives, they can probably find evidence of what kind of writer they are. And I've learned this in hindsight. But I was going through a memorabilia box in our basement, and I stumbled across this folder. And when I was in university, I had a column in the newspaper, a weekly column in the university newspaper. And I came upon all of my outlines for my column. And they were little boxes with notes in them, boxes flowing into boxes. And because I found that made it easier for me to write and faster to write the whole thing if I took the first 20 minutes and thought about mapping it out. And I'd forgotten that completely. So it turns out I've been outlining my writing for a very long time. And, I remembered that only, after discovering this box.
Right. So Salma, thanks. She goes, that works for me. And I'm not sure which part. I think it's probably your outline system. And then Santa had another comment. I'm not an outline person. I remember being so impressed with my first novel when I had to write a synopsis for it for the very first time.
Right.
Good one.
Exactly.
So best laid plans. I don't want you to leave without telling everybody about your very first book, because I think with many things in life, we're worried about something when we haven't done it the first time. And then after you've kind of gone through the process of whether it's buy your first house, buy your first car, have your first kiss, write your first novel, there's always this like finding your way. And to me, it's such an interesting, fascinating story. And of course, I love the story because Gordon introduced us, because it was a podcast-oriented story. And then you just continued. Well, I don't want to get into it anymore. What happened with your first book, The Best Laid Plans?
Right. Well, I wrote this novel back in 2005 and 6, I think it was, when I wrote it. And I wanted to write a novel. Actually, I wanted to see if I could write a novel. I didn't know whether I could. I didn't know how to. I just wanted to try. So I thought I should write about something that I care about, that I know something about, that I have some views on. So I wrote about Canadian politics because I had worked in that world, and I have had a growing frustration with how we practice politics in Canada. And I thought, rather than writing a rage-filled nonfiction polemic on the state of politics in this country, I would cloak my ideas in the guise of a story and put my thoughts in the minds and the mouths of some characters you might come to care about. And I wanted to make it a funny novel because those were the novels I liked to read. Really, that should be the clearest indication of my naivete, that I would write a satirical novel of Canadian politics and expect a publisher to beat a path to my door for it. Because it's not exactly a topic that would be considered to have universal appeal. But I just thought it was important to write about something that was important to me. So I wrote this novel, and as you might expect, after a year of sending out query letters, plot synopses, manuscripts to literary agents and publishers across the country and into the United States, I had received exactly 0 rejection letters. I hadn't made a big enough impression on the traditional publishing establishment to generate an automated rejection letter. So it was a a bit discouraging, but I realized that probably it was my topic that had caused that, or well, the writing too, for all I knew. But I just thought I should self-publish it to justify all the years I had spent working on it. So I went down the path of self-publishing with some regret and many reservations, but I realized that I would have to market the book myself. And I thought, to build an audience for it before it even came out as a book, I would podcast the entire novel in its chapter by chapter, and give it away for free on iTunes, just as a way of building this audience and perhaps persuading them that they might want to buy a copy of the book when it's available for their mother, father, next door neighbor, wife, etc. So I was already a podcaster. I started podcasting in 2006. In my day job, public relations, I started a podcast with a colleague called Inside PR and did, I think, 450 weekly episodes without missing a week. So I certainly knew about the process and how to do it. What I didn't know is that nobody at that stage in Canada had podcast a novel in its entirety and given it away for free. I'm glad I didn't know that, or I may not have done it. But I would come home on a Friday night. I would read a chapter of my novel into my digital recorder. I'd stick some music on the front, some music on the back. I had a good friend I play ball hockey with who has a great voiceover voice, and he did the little introduction for me. And I would release one chapter each week until it was done. And it's quite possible that I would not have completed the self-publishing process were it not for the very positive feedback I got from listeners around the world to the podcast. It was my first true, I think, validation that I had actually written a novel. I didn't believe my brother and my wife and my sister-in-law, who read the manuscript and said they love it, but they loved me. So I didn't necessarily trust objectivity, but the person commenting from Cairo or Kuala Lumpur or Australia or Belgium, who were so complimentary about the novel, it kind of made me think, okay, maybe I actually have written a novel here, because I honestly didn't know. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's how it happened, and I self-published it, and miraculously that self-published novel won the Leacock Medal in 2008, which changed my life in an instant as a writer. I landed a literary agent immediately. We signed with McClellan and Stewart, Penguin Random House, where I have been for all 7 of my novels, the 7th coming out in 2021.
So you self-published the book. It won an award as a self-published book. And then of course, everyone is like, well, I guess he knows how to write. I guess the book is good. It won an award. So maybe we should publish it, when before they didn't even bother giving you a rejection letter.
Right. That's the short version. Yeah, exactly. The Leacock Medal was what changed everything, because it's one of Canada's oldest literary awards, won by some of my heroes. I'm still very humbled to see my name listed among the other writers who have won the Leacock Medal. So without the Leacock Medal, even just being shortlisted for the Leacock Medal, I imagine I might still be selling books out of the trunk of my car. But winning the medal seemed to push it over the top, and I've been very happily ensconced at McClellan and Stewart ever since. And who knows if I'd written any more books without that happening. So I feel. I mean, I think every winner of the Leacock Medal is grateful, but no one is more grateful than I am, because it really did change my life in an instant, really.
So for all your following books, of course, you didn't do any more podcasting, because now you're this famous writer.
Actually, I need to correct you there. I continued to podcast and give away for free my first 6 novels. So if you go to iTunes and plug in my name, you'll see 5 or 6, yes, my first 6 novels. And I just did that of loyalty to my podcast listeners, because they were so good to me, and they helped keep me going to self-publish the novel, which led to all of this. So the first time I did not podcast was the new novel Albatross, which came last August, almost a year ago now, because Penguin Random House started an audiobook division, and I finally sold out and said, okay, let's do it as a formal audiobook this year. But the first 6 novels you can still get on iTunes for free. You have to listen to me read the book, but
well, you have a good voice, so I'm sure it's quite a great experience, and that's interesting. So the next step, of course, is do the audiobook. Audiobooks are huge, and you're continuing to do that. So I'm really happy about that. So tell us a little bit about your newest book, Albatross, and I'm going to bring it up here. There it is on Amazon. What's it about? How did it come about?
Yeah, this is it's a novel of a young man. It opens when he's in high school, and we follow him probably for about maybe 10 years. I would say something like that, 7 to 10 years. But to me, it's a novel about the conflict between success and happiness. And we work so hard to be successful. And sometimes when we get that success, we realize that, okay, I'm successful. It's what I've been working for. I thought it would feel better. I thought it would bring me more happiness. And sometimes it's someone who falls into a job that they didn't really expect to, but they do pretty well at it. They get promoted, they get raises, they get headhunted, and 10 years pass and that they're at the top of their game, but it's not making them really happy. So I wanted to examine that.
To me, except it took me 20 years. I was a little slower than the protagonist in your book.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean. I think it happens to a lot of people because, you know, the pressures of earning a living and paying the mortgage, we end up sometimes doing things that don't bring us as much happiness as something else might bring us. So in the novel, to create this admittedly kind of artificial scenario, but in the novel, the narrator really desperately wants to become a writer. He loves writing. He loves reading and literature. He's not awesome as a writer. He's quite good and he's getting better, but he has to work at it. But it's still his dream. And he discovers when he's 17 years old that he actually has a body that was perfectly constructed for the game of golf. And in quick succession, he becomes the finest golfer in the world, earning fame and fortune, millions and millions of dollars. But he loses his relationship with his girlfriend, and his writing falls by the wayside because of the demands of his sport. And in the end, he needs to figure out, actually it's more in the middle of the novel, he has to figure out, you know, am I doing something that brings me happiness, or am I doing something that simply brings me success? And what do I really want out of life? So it's, for those of listeners who might not be interested in golf, it is a book about golf. It's a book about these important questions about what makes us happy and how much we sacrifice for the things that make us happy. Wow. So I had fun with it. I hope it's funny, but I hope also it gives readers reason to think a little bit about some important questions.
Cool. And at the bottom, we have a little scrolling bar with the Amazon link, and in everybody's comments section, you should see the link there as well. Of course, we can't recommend it highly enough. And it's all of your books are awesome. And wasn't paying attention. I've been traveling the world, so I now know what I'm going to get my mom for Christmas.
There you go. That's great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
And Terry, thank you for joining us. We've kind of come to the end of our time together. You've been so generous. I'd love to, I'm going to ask you like how people can get a hold of you and show your website to everybody in a second. But before we do that, if you had one piece of advice to give a new or struggling or not quite having won an award to get them over the top author, what would that be?
I think it would be try to ignore all of the latest trends out there and write something that is meaningful to you. I remember when I was starting out, vampire novels were very big. The Twilight series, vampires were huge. And I remember meeting a young writer who said, "Well, I'm going to write a vampire novel. That seems to be the hot thing right now." And I said, "Whoa, do you like vampires? Have you read much about them?" "No." "Do you know any vampires?" "No." "Are you a vampire?" "No." "Do you have any connection to vampires at all?" "No." And it made me wonder whether it was a good idea for them to write a novel about vampires. I think far more important to write about something that really connects with you, that is meaningful for you, that resonates with your own life. It doesn't have to be autobiographical, but something that you care about deeply. Let that be what you write about, because I think discerning readers can always tell when a writer has jumped on the marketing bandwagon and written something that they think is going to be hot, or is hot, that in the trends right then. If there's no connection to you, the reader feels that when they read it. So don't worry about trying to satisfy what the latest trend is. Write about something that is important to you.
Awesome. And we've got the vampires, of course. You forgot about werewolves.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And I was thinking about all the Harry Potter novels and how successful, and like trying to think of a different name that sounded like Harry Potter, and then it was just you need to be unique. You need people, and I think there's an infinite hunger for good writers and good books to read, right? Like people talk about YouTube and people watching and sort of things we're doing right now, but there's nothing like just settling down and sitting down and reading with a good book. And I'm just I have a book holding up my computer. I was going to show traveling the world. I still have the paper book, right? I'll show this, my journal. So there's just something about holding them, and I have an iPad and I have lots of books on my iPad, because when I'm in Medellin, I'm traveling the world. I can't carry a suitcase of books with me as much as I'd like. And but there's just something about that tactile feeling of the paper that I just love. And I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to share, whether it's a story or it's a teaching of something along those lines with people. And we need to do more of it. The world really needs it. So thank you very much, Terry. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, and everybody asks this question and they say their website and everything else, and I'm going to bring up your website. I've got it right here. And oops, wrong way. There we go. So there's your website. It's terryfallis.com.
Oh, you spelled the name wrong there, Scott. It's just Fallis.
No, whoops, excuse me.
That's all right.
And my number one rule is before I go live, and you came early, is I show people their name because of this very reason. So I apologize for that.
It doesn't matter at all. That's great.
I spelled your name twice. Just a second. Fortunately, you didn't see the second error. Now, there we go. Okay.
And if people want to get a hold of me,
website.
Oh yeah, well, it's really just a blog, but I don't blog very often on it. But it has all the information about my books, and you can do the podcast of each of the books there as well. It has some reviews of the novels, and under the contact section, there is, there's an email address if people want to get in touch with me. It's all there. There you go. So,
your awards, wonderful, great. Well, thank you very much, Terry. You've been so generous with your time and your knowledge, and we really appreciate you. And I value our friendship a lot, even though it seems like we only chat once every 6 years.
It's true. Look, thank you for having me. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing to promote writers. And so thank you for that, and delighted to be here, Scott. All the best.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Really happy that you came. tend to do this every Thursday at 10 in the morning Eastern time, and that's kind of our habit. And of course, you can get the replays. They'll be up on our Facebook page, and be sure to head over to www.free-ebooks.net. We've got tens of thousands of books for you to download for free, and also we've got an audiobook section as well. You might want to check that out. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.